They put her out on a Tuesday, not with a scene, not with the kind of dramatic confrontation that at least has the dignity of acknowledging what it is. Quietly, the way families do things they are ashamed of, with lowered voices and closed doors and the specific efficiency of people who want something done before the neighbors notice. Zara Mitchell was 22 years old and 7 months pregnant, and she had grown up in that house and had loved the people inside it completely, and they had looked at her stomach and had made their decision and had communicated it the following morning with the specific finality of people who believe they are protecting something more important than the person they are putting out. She had packed 2 bags, the only 2 she could carry. She had walked out the front door on a Tuesday morning in July with the summer heat already building and nowhere specific to go, and a child growing inside her that none of them had asked about beyond the fact of its existence, which had been sufficient for the decision they had made. What they did not know, what none of them had thought to ask, because asking would have required treating her situation as something other than a problem to be managed, was who the father was. They were about to find out. The whole street was about to find out. And the finding out was going to be the most uncomfortable Tuesday any of them had ever experienced. Zara Mitchell had grown up in a house on Clement Street with her parents Robert and Diane and her older brother Marcus in the specific ordinary comfort of a family that had enough. Enough space, enough stability, enough of the things that make a childhood feel safe without being exceptional. Robert Mitchell worked at the City Water Authority and had for 22 years. Diane Mitchell ran a small alterations business from the spare room and had for 15. Marcus worked at a shipping company and lived 3 blocks away and came to dinner on Sundays. They were a close family in the specific way of families that have never been tested by anything large enough to reveal the limits of that closeness. They went to church. They knew their neighbors. They had opinions about the right way to do things, and those opinions were held with particular conviction of people who have never had a reason to revise them. Getting pregnant outside of marriage was not the right way to do things. This was a position. It had not been stated explicitly before because it had not needed to be stated explicitly before. When it needed to be stated, it was stated. Zara had packed her bags the following morning. She had met Daniel 8 months ago at a community fundraising event in the park 3 miles from Clement Street. She had been there as a volunteer, helping with registration, managing the check-in table with the specific organized efficiency that was her most natural mode of operating. He had been there helping set up chairs, which she had noticed because he was in jeans and a plain shirt and was doing it with the unself-conscious ease of someone who had been taught that no work was beneath him and who had apparently internalized that lesson completely. She had noticed him before he noticed her. When he noticed her, he had come directly to the check-in table and had said something that was not a line, just an observation about the organization of the event that was specific enough to suggest he had actually been paying attention. And she had responded, and the conversation had followed with the natural momentum of 2 people who have found a right frequency on the first try. They had talked for 40 minutes at that first event. She had gone home thinking about the conversation rather than about him specifically, which was a specific quality of connection that she had learned to pay attention to, when what someone says stays with you longer than how they look when they say it. He had called her 2 days later. She had not given him her number at the event, and the fact that he had found it had raised a question that he had answered immediately and without embarrassment when she asked. He had resources available to him that most people did not have, and he had used one of them, and he understood if that felt like a violation, and would accept whatever response she gave. She had thought about it for a moment, and had said she appreciated the honesty, and had agreed to dinner. The dinner had been the first of 6 before she had understood who he actually was, and he had told her before she could ask. Daniel Okafor, 29 years old, the only son of President Charles Okafor, who had been elected 2 years ago on a platform of economic reform and institutional transparency, and who had conducted his presidency with a specific combination of political intelligence and personal integrity that had made him genuinely respected rather than simply powerful. Daniel had told Zara on their 7th meeting, in a coffee shop, specifically not in any of the places he could have chosen that would have made the announcement feel like performance, and had done in the direct, unceremonious way he did everything. He had said he had something to tell her, and then he had told her. Zara had looked at him across the coffee shop table, and had been quiet for a moment, and had then said that explained the car. He had laughed. It was the first time she had made him laugh genuinely and unreservedly, and it had been, for both of them, the moment when what was between them stopped being something they were observing and became something they were choosing. They had been careful. Not secretive. Careful. Daniel's life existed inside a specific kind of visibility that required a certain amount of management, and he had explained this to Zara early, and she had understood it with the practical intelligence she brought to everything, and they had navigated together with the specific teamwork of two people who had decided that what they have is worth the navigation. They had been happy. This was the simple true thing that existed alongside all the other true things. They had been genuinely happy in the specific way that is different from comfortable or convenient. The kind of happy that comes from choosing someone and finding that the choosing is consistently confirmed by who that person turns out to be on the ordinary days when nobody is performing anything for anyone. The pregnancy had arrived at month 5 of the relationship. Zara had discovered on a Thursday and had told Daniel the same evening, because she was not a person who held things, and because the conversation, however difficult, was less difficult than the alternative of holding alone. Daniel had listened to everything she said and had been quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man retreating, but the quiet of a man thinking, which was a distinction she had learned to recognize in him, and had said he needed one night to think and would call her in the morning. She had said she understood. He had called at 7:15 the following morning and had said he was in, fully, completely, without conditions. He had said he wanted to do everything properly, and that doing everything properly required speaking to his father before anything became public, and that he needed 2 weeks to arrange that in the right way. She had said she trusted him. She had meant it completely. What neither of them had accounted for was her cousin Keisha, and a pregnancy test in a bathroom bin, and a family gathering 3 days later. Robert Mitchell had come home on a Friday evening with the specific expression of a man who has received information that has confirmed a fear he did not know he had, and who has had the 40-minute drive home to let the fear become something harder. He had asked Zara directly, and she had told him directly, because directness was the only mode she had, and because lying would have been both futile and wrong. She had said she was pregnant, and that the father was someone she was serious about, and that she needed 2 weeks for everything to be properly arranged before she could explain fully. Robert had said 2 weeks was not something he had available. Diane had said the same thing. Marcus had looked at the floor. The conversation had lasted 20 minutes and had concluded with a decision that had been communicated the following morning. Zara had not called Daniel from inside the house, because calling Daniel from inside the house felt like something she could not do with her parents in the next room, having made the decision they had made about her. She had packed her bags and left, and had called Daniel from the street, and his phone had gone to voicemail, and she had left a message that said she was fine, and that she had left her parent house, and that she would explain when they spoke, and had then walked to the library 2 miles away, because the library was the only place she could think of that was free and air-conditioned and would not require her to explain herself to anyone. Daniel had been trying to reach her for 3 days before she left. The security detail had flagged the pregnancy in a routine monitoring report, not from surveillance of Zara specifically, but from a report that had included a reference to Daniel's activities and associations over the previous month that had been assembled as part of the standard briefing process that the president's office maintained. The president had called Daniel into his private office on a Thursday morning and had closed the door and had asked him directly. Daniel had told him everything: Zara's name, how they had met, how long they had been together, the pregnancy, the plan to speak to him before anything became public. He had told it all in the direct, complete way he told everything to his father, which was possible because Charles Okafor had raised his son with the specific understanding that honesty between them was not optional, and that the consequences of honesty were always more manageable than the consequences of its absence. The president had listened to everything. He had been quiet for a long time afterward. Not the quiet of disapproval, but the quiet of a man who is taking something seriously enough to give it the full weight of his attention before he responds. Then he had asked Daniel 3 questions. The first was whether he loved her. Daniel had said yes, without any pause. The second was whether he was certain the child was his. Daniel had said absolutely, and with the directness of a man who found the question necessary to ask, but not complicated to answer. The third was whether she was a good person. Daniel had said she was the best person he knew. The president had been quiet again for a shorter time. Then he had said he wanted to meet her. Daniel had said he would arrange it and had then tried to call Zara and had gotten her voicemail, and had called twice more and had gotten voicemail both times, and had understood that something had happened that had moved the timeline in a direction he had not planned for. Agent Patricia Moore had found Zara in the periodical section of the Westfield Public Library on a Tuesday afternoon, the same Tuesday she had left the house. For hours later, Her phone now charged enough to receive the 12 missed calls from Daniel that had arrived while the battery had been dead. Patricia was 41 years old and had been with the Presidential Security Detail for 8 years and had developed, over those 8 years, the specific quality of someone who has seen the full range of human situations that proximity to power produces and who has learned to meet all of them with the same warm professional competence. She had sat down beside Zara without preamble and had said she was there to help and that Daniel had sent her. Zara had looked at the dark suit and the earpiece and had said her phone needed another 10 minutes to charge. Patricia had said that was completely fine. They had sat together in the periodicals section for 10 minutes while the phone charged, and Patricia had not asked any questions and had not offered any information beyond what she had already offered, and had simply been present in the way that Zara had needed someone to be present since Tuesday morning. When the phone was charged, Zara had called Daniel. He had answered before the first ring had finished. The conversation had lasted 20 minutes. Daniel had told her about the meeting with his father, and what his father had said, and what his father wanted. Zara had told Daniel about her family's decision, and the 2 bags, and the library. Daniel had been very still on the phone for a moment after she told him. She could feel the stillness through the call, the specific quality of a man absorbing something, and deciding how to respond to it in the way that did the most good, rather than the way that felt most immediately satisfying. He had said he was coming to her family's house. She had said she did not think that was necessary. He had said he thought it was. She had said her parents had made their decision. He had said he understood that, and that he had something to say about it, and that the saying of it should happen in person. Zara had looked at Patricia sitting beside her in the periodicals section, and had understood that the geometry of her situation had shifted in ways that were still becoming clear to her, and that Daniel coming to her parents' house was going to produce something that she could not fully predict, but that she had, in some part of herself she could not entirely explain, been waiting for since the Tuesday morning, when she had walked out the front door with her 2 bags. The black SUV had pulled onto Clement Street at 3:47 in the afternoon. The street had been quiet in the specific way of a residential street on a Tuesday afternoon in July. A few cars, a lawn mower somewhere in the middle distance, the sound of someone's air conditioning unit working against the heat. The SUV's arrival had changed the quality of the streets quiet the way certain arrivals always do. Not loudly, just with a specific weight of something that does not belong to the ordinary texture of place, and that the place therefore notices before anyone has consciously registered what they are noticing. Curtains had moved. A neighbor had stepped onto his porch. By the time the SUV had stopped in front of the Mitchell house, 2 more neighbors had appeared, and a third was visible through a window. Daniel had gotten out of the vehicle alone. Patricia and 2 other members of the detail had positioned themselves with a specific unobtrusive efficiency of people who were providing security without making it the story. Daniel had walked to the front door in his gray suit and had knocked. Robert Mitchell had opened the door after a moment, still in his work clothes from the Water Authority, expression already complicated before he had seen who was on his doorstep, because an official-looking black SUV parked in front of his house had already told him that something unusual was happening. He had looked at Daniel. Daniel had said good afternoon and had introduced himself, Daniel Okafor, and he was the father of Zara's child, and he was there to speak with them about their daughter. Robert had looked at the name landing on him the way names sometimes land when they are more than names, when they are attached to a context that immediately reorganizes everything else in the room. He had said the name slowly. Okafor. He had looked at the security detail. He had looked at the SUV. He had looked at Daniel. He had said, "Are you the president's son?" Daniel had said yes. The silence that followed that yes was the specific silence of a man whose understanding of the decision he had made the previous morning was being entirely revised in real time. Robert Mitchell stood in the doorway of his house and looked at the son of the President of the United States standing on his front step in a gray suit, and looked at his daughter standing in the driveway with her 2 bags that she had packed that morning, and looked at his neighbors who were now openly watching from their porches and their yards and their windows, and he looked at all of it simultaneously in the way that people look at things when too many things are happening at once for the looking to be organized. Then he had looked at Zara. His expression in that moment was the most complicated expression in the entire story. Not one feeling, but many arriving at the same time without adequate space for any of them. Shame, relief, the specific devastating recognition of a man who has understood that the thing he did yesterday morning was the most wrong thing he has done in a long time, and that undoing it is not simple, and that the undoing of it requires him to stand in his own doorway, and reckon with that in front of his neighbors and the president's son and his daughter, who was holding 2 bags that she packed because of him. Diane had appeared behind Robert. She had looked at the scene and had looked at Daniel and had looked at Zara and had put her hand over her mouth in the specific gesture of a woman, receiving something she was not prepared to receive. Marcus had appeared behind Diane. He had looked at his sister. His expression was the most honest in the family, not complicated by the layers of parental authority and expectation that complicated his parents' expressions. Just a young man who had watched his sister be put out of her home and had said nothing and was now standing in the full weight of that silence and finding it heavier than he had anticipated when he had been choosing it. Daniel had not made a speech. He had said what needed to be said clearly and without drama. He had said he was sorry for the delay in coming to them properly, and that the delay was his responsibility and not Zara's. He had said he was there now, and that he wanted to proceed correctly from this point. He had said his father wanted to meet Zara and her family, and that he hoped that could be arranged soon. He had said Zara was not returning inside the house unless she chose to, and that she was coming with him, and that everything she needed would be provided, and that he would be in touch to arrange a meeting between the families through appropriate channels. He had said all of this in a direct way. He said everything, and had then looked at Zara. She looked at her father in the doorway, and at her mother behind him, and at her brother, whose eyes had finally come up from the floor to meet hers. She had looked at all of them for a moment. Then she had looked at Daniel. She had said she was ready. Patricia had taken the 2 bags. Zara had gotten into the SUV. Daniel had gotten in beside her. The door had closed. The SUV had pulled away from Clement Street with the same unhurried authority with which it had arrived, and the street had watched it go in the specific collective silence of people who have witnessed something significant and are still in the process of understanding what they have witnessed. Robert Mitchell had stood in his doorway for a long time after the SUV turned the corner. Diane had put her hand on his arm. Marcus had gone inside. None of them had said anything to each other for a while. There was not language immediately available for what they were all holding. There would be later. There was not yet. The president had met Zara 2 weeks later. The meeting had been arranged through the appropriate channels as Daniel had promised, and had taken place in a private family room in a residence that Charles Okafor had ensured felt as warm and informal as possible, because he had understood from everything Daniel had told him that the most important thing he could do in this meeting was make a young woman who'd been put out her home by her own family feel that she had arrived somewhere, genuinely welcoming. He had stood when she entered the room. He had held both her hands in both of his, and had said his son had told him a great deal about her, and that he was very glad to meet her. Zara had looked at the president holding her hands, and had felt something that was not quite surreal, and not quite ordinary, but somewhere in a specific space between those 2 things at extraordinary moments sometimes occupy when you're inside them and have not yet had the distance to understand fully what they are. She had said she was glad to meet him too. She had meant it. He had smiled. Not the public smile she had seen in news photographs, but something warmer and more specific. The smile of a man who has just confirmed something his son told him and found the confirmation satisfying. The conversation had lasted 2 hours. It had covered practical things and personal things, and specific things that needed to be discussed between 2 families who were joining their lives in a way that neither had planned for, but that both were committed to navigate with as much honesty and care as the situation required. The president had asked Zara questions that were direct and warm, and that she had answered with a directness that was her most natural register. He had listened to her answers with the full attention of a man for whom listening was a skill he had spent a lifetime developing, and that he applied to everything he considered important. He had said at the end of the 2 hours that he was glad Daniel had found her. Zara had said she was glad she had gone to that fundraising event. The president had said so was he. It had been for a conversation conducted in the official residence with a security detail outside the door, the most honest 2 hours Zara could remember spending. Her parents had called 3 days after the driveway. Her mother first. Diane had called at 9 in the morning and had cried from the first word, and had said she was sorry in the specific way of a woman who means it completely and also does not fully understand everything she is apologizing for, and who is trying to close the gap between those 2 things in real time. Zara had listened to all of it. She had said she needed time. Diane had said she understood. Her father had called an hour later and had been less tearful and more deliberate. Robert Mitchell was a man who processed things before he spoke, and the 3 days had given him enough processing time to arrive at words that were more considered his wife's, and in some ways more painful because of their consideration. He had said he had been wrong. He had said it simply and without qualification, and had said that the wrongness of it was not about who Daniel's father was, and that he needed her to understand that the wrongness was about what he had done to her regardless of anything else, and that he had known it was wrong when he had done it, and had done it anyway, and that he did not have a good explanation for that, and was not going to offer a bad one. Zara had listened to this and had felt something shift in the specific way that things shift when a person says a true thing rather than a convenient thing, and you receive in your body before your mind has finished processing it. She had said she needed time. He had said he would wait. She had said she would be in touch. He had said he would be there. She had sat in a room that had been arranged for her, warm and quiet and entirely hers, with a window that looked out over a garden, and enough space for the things she had in her 2 bags, and the things that would come later, and had put both hands on her stomach, and had thought about the child growing inside her, who was going to be born into a world that was complicated and extraordinary, and that was going to require, from both of them, exactly the kind of courage that Zara had discovered. She possessed on a Tuesday morning in July with 2 bags, and a closed door behind her, and nowhere specific to go. She had not known she possessed it until the possessing of it had been required. She knew now she was not going to forget it, and the child she was carrying, who would arrive in 2 months into a room that Daniel had already begun arranging with the specific, thoughtful care he brought to things that mattered, was going to grow up knowing their mother had it. Not because Zara was going to tell the story as a story of triumph or as a story of injustice, but because the people who raise you show you who you are through the quality of how they live, and Zara Mitchell lived with her hands open and her eyes clear and her back straight even on the mornings when everything was harder than it should have been, especially on those mornings, especially then. Daniel had been there when she called her mother back the second time, not the first call where she had said she needed time, but the second one 3 weeks later, when the time had been taken and she was ready to begin the longer conversation. He had been in the room reading when she had made the call and had offered to leave, and she had shaken her head, and he had stayed. She had talked to her mother for an hour. At the end of the call, her mother had said she could not wait to meet the baby. Zara had said soon. They had both understood what soon meant and what it would require, and that the requiring was going to be ongoing and not simple, and that neither of them was pretending otherwise. Zara had put the phone down and had looked at Daniel across the room. He had looked back at her with the expression he wore when he was entirely present with her, not performing anything, not managing anything, just there. She had said it was going to be complicated. He had said he knew. She had said she was glad he was there for it. He had said there was nowhere else he would be. She had believed him. She had believed him because in 8 months of knowing him, she had not found a single instance of him saying something he did not mean, and she was a woman who paid attention to instances, and she was not going to stop paying attention now. She had too much at stake. They both did, and the stakes, as it turned out, were exactly the right size for the two of them. They had always been that kind of people. They were just finding out now, together, what that meant.